Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question, and that is, how do I know if this is true love or is this a relationship that is toxic? That could be a relationship, air quotes, with someone who is narcissistic, malignant, narcissistic, or psychopathic. In other words, you're dealing with someone who might have a personality disorder, a cluster B personality disorder, whether it's diagnosed, undiagnosed, they're aware or unaware, and then, or they might be, into the antisocial psychopathic, where they, really are becoming a toxic influence in your life. And how do you really know? How do you see through the blurred lines? With a relationship that is based in toxicity, that is based in manipulation. So toxic basically meaning just like the word sounds, poisonous, destructive, causing ill health, disease, distress, suffering, pain, anxiety, concern, pressure, so toxic versus true or real love. So I think a lot of people get so immersed in a relationship that they want it to be perceived a specific way. So part of a manipulative relationship is the presence of denial. So if you have to push, or repress your feelings down, if you have to push them down, otherwise known as repression, or suppress them, in other words, just like a cough, if you feel the way that you express yourself has to be repressed or suppressed, then you're generally not in the presence of love. You're not in the presence of positive regard. And I'm not talking about meaning, do you just be blatantly rude, unpolite? We're talking about, common sense, normal communication. In other words, your existence, your very state of being. So that sort of bottom line experience, if you will, this baseline experience, this I am, your identity. So we're really going, to address the question, we're really going in deep. It might seem so simple that it is complicated. Just like a Beatles song, it is so simple, but yet it is so complex. So I would say understanding, is it love or is it a manipulative relationship? You have to look at the degree really of your ability to feel comfortable while expressing yourself. Do you feel comfortable or do you feel uncomfortable expressing yourself? When you're in the presence, and that's for you to answer, and a lot of people will you have an immediate gut reaction. That is the action and response that you want to captivate, not the one that has been repressed, suppressed, pushed down. So part of a relationship, I would say, that becomes very divisive, very unhealthy, with a relationship with someone who has a personality disorder, malignant, narcissistic, or psychopathic. We're talking about these individuals are typified by an insatiable need for power or control, coupled with a lack of empathy. So if we can really sort of boil things down into some basic ingredients and then understand the spectrum and then the varying amounts and then the implications of this, meaning how it manifests, how it maps out, what it looks like, what it does, how it makes you feel, and how it, changes radically the course of your life, which is why, I kind of talk about the pod thinking and then the nod thinking, which are, land you in completely different places. I would say in your identity, your I am, your degree of confidence, your degree of self-trust, your ability to navigate the world and feel happy. So there's many of these emotional states that we need to call into the discussion to understand, what does, this feel like, or does it not feel like? So when you are in the presence, really of love, you should feel comfortable expressing yourself. You should not, experience fear. The fear of character assassination, the fear of being ridiculed, the fear of being judged, the fear of information, being used to determine and sort of, lead to future vulnerabilities, i.e., that gives them more opportunity to bring this up to you again and again and hold it over you like a dark cloud. So you might really feel then a heaviness, a darkness, a degree of a lack of warmth, otherwise known as, sort of, that is really sort of where the fear and then the lack of empathy comes into play. A deficit of empathy, a deficit of warmth. I mean, you're living in the emotional Arctic. You're trying to put a tunnel of love in the Arctic, tundra. I mean, it's just, oftentimes not possible. It is inhabitable. I mean, if you were to go to a craggy, desert mountain, and try to build, a housing community there, it just would not be, you cannot, convert something into what it is not, containing certain amenities or necessities of life. And when we talk about emotional necessities, there is also a specific foundation, groundwork, and fodder, if you will, materials, if you will, ingredients that if you do not have, it will make for an inhospitable or unloving relationship. In other words, a relationship that is not typified by love and acceptance. It is typified by fear and control, which then becomes animosity. We're talking about, some problems that cause emotional abuse, trauma bonding, a whole different subset of experience of life, completely like on the other side of the globe. You're perceiving something, or, you're in a relationship that feigns or appears to be as if. Appears to be, but is not. So this then creates cognitive dissonance. This creates confusion. This creates fog, otherwise known as fear, obligation, and guilt. And so if you're in this, if you are in, one moment. If you are in a relationship that is punctuated by the percussive fear, fear, guilt, obligation, which is really which is founded in judgment and really sort of rejection. So a relationship, I would say, with a narcissist is sort of like being rejected while they're telling you to remain and stay put. It's kind of like a dog that you say, stay, and then you just sort of abuse them, take things out on the dog, just take advantage of their vulnerabilities as being this, a furry creature. And, you get misused, you get miscommunicated to, you develop erroneous thoughts, and so, then people think that they're the problematic one because of the way that they have been related to. But if you step out of the toxic swamp and then you find that, if you're out, and then things you are, so you have to understand really the components and to see it clearly, not what you have pushed down, hope that it would be, wishful thinking, aspire, or to the fantasy. One thing I would say with a narcissist is the relationship oftentimes is founded on fantasy or illusion, or sort of what you might consider their grandiose thinking. It's just that they are better than, that they are superior. And they might have more intelligence or whatever, but we're talking about someone with a personality disorder who's sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Who tries to exude certain power over others, or undue influence, sort of undue, violation of boundaries. If your boundaries have been violated, meaning you're in this fear, which is usually created from, the rejection component, which is, I kind of feel that if you break it down, if you're in a loving relationship, you should not be, afraid. So it's very difficult to simultaneously, I would say, live in fear and then live in love. You might have a vacillation back and forth, but fear will radically change the course of your life, and love, the experience of love, will also be a more gentle and rewarding path of life. So if you feel that your life is unrewarding, unfulfilling, you're unhappy, the people do not smile, they do not cheer, they do not, support you, they, don't wish you well. They're instead throwing you under the bus. Indirect passive, communicate, indirect passive communication, which is passive aggressive, which means, being one way in front of somebody and then completely another when that person leaves the room or they leave the room. In other words, it is all an act. And so, love is not an act. Love is not something where, it's something different when you don't see it. So really, love is really what you do in the dark, to me. And if you are, in sort of, really, the dark really is the light. So if you have the presence of the light, which means sort of feeling that you are okay. This is self-esteem. This is positive self-regard. Oftentimes a deprived experience when you're in a relationship with a narcissist. I would say it's very difficult to simultaneously experience self-esteem while you're in a relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath. So another good red flag for you is, how do you feel about yourself in the relationship? Not your, wishful thinking, not your hopeful thinking, not the fantasy, not the dream, not the unreality, but the true core you. This is in the privacy of these videos. You got to get in touch with that, because oftentimes that person has been pushed down, had to repress their emotions, like an 8-foot ice glacier, emotionally, to push it down, and sort of, they don't even recognize themselves. They don't recognize what they're made of. They don't recognize that they're a person with a heart, an awareness, a consciousness. It's just kind of like when the glacier melts away, like how timely now for global warming, and then the sea levels rising, but it's kind of like, and then when the glacier wears away and you can see more of the ground underneath, or, and there's all sorts of history, and then you have the positive history of yourself after there's sort of that glacier is removed. So if you are finding that you are, if you look at sort of the spectrum of time, and, or, the continuum of time, and then the spectrum of emotions sort of on that chart, if you will, and then understand, what has superseded or, the relationship, you had to distort the way you see yourself for the relationship to continue. In other words, was this part of the process? The narcissist will cause a distortion of the way that you see yourself that meets their needs. So this is part of the pathological aspect of selfishness, is they, a narcissist will treat you as an extension of themselves or objectify you. You are an object. You are a vase in the room. You are a stool to sit on. You are something to move according to their whim or will. You're not a person with a consciousness awareness. And unless you reflect back to them, what they need, and you're not your true self, then the relationship will be wonderful. But then this creates a problem, because then people end up developing codependence. They aren't able to stand up for themselves. They're not able to recognize abuse. They're not able to move forward because they are, sort of dissociated from that general active part of themselves, which knows how to function. But because of the repression, because of how they had to distort the way that they perceive themselves, their obligations, because of the fear, and because of the manipulation of this sort of relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath. So, I mean, we're not talking about this. This is not as a death sentence. We're just describing a phenomenon in relationships. And so you usually, I would say in a narcissist relationship, you have to distort yourself to fit into their mold. So there creates this shaping from without versus a shaping from within. This then leads to disempowerment. If you have to, and there's always, I would say, a balance of this in society. In other words, you're not going to go, shopping in your bathrobe. You're not going to go to your job, in your slippers. This is, so there's certain things, of course, but then you own and adopt, and it's for your own best interest. Clothes protect you, et cetera, et cetera. So, but if you have had to, I would say, cause yourself or, agree to, in a more of a helpless manner. So based on a degree of a lack of leverage, had to distort your wellness or your I am or your happiness in order to fit into their mold. Usually the mold is created sometimes out of negativity, of a rejection of you and your authentic self. So it's very important that you understand that your authentic self is like hanging out the window. The foot of your soul is like, hanging out the passenger window. It's not really on the ground. You're not really standing on 2 feet. You're kind of fitting. You've allowed yourself to be shaped kind of like by a sculptor that doesn't see the best in you. So they'll sculpt out a monster. They'll sculpt out whatever it is, in you that fits their needs and oftentimes their projection needs to not own their own insecurity or inadequacies. In other words, it's not my problem, it's you're the problem. In other words, and oftentimes there's an inability or a lack of ability of a narcissist because they don't have empathy, that they don't really have this comfortability with openness, warmth, affection, genuine communication. There's always a dynamic that is asymmetrical in nature. So it is based on this asymmetry, and it is based on this imbalance. So, there's always going to be some degree of imbalance in life. I mean, you're usually going to swing, but, ultimately, usually things come to balance. That is known as homeostasis. This, I would say, is an experience that you do not get to experience with a narcissist, because there's always this sort of, I would say, dissatisfaction for the way that people are because it doesn't suit their needs, or they're easily annoyed, I would say. And so, in other words, it's those person's problem. The person, that person is annoyed. It doesn't mean that person is an irritant. It just means that the receptors of that person say that is, annoying. So in other words, it's the narcissist oftentimes that will find a lot of problems with others and throw other people under the bus, but be very different to them in their face. So this is part of the problem. If you're married in this type of situation, if you're working in this sort of situation, if this is in a very important relationship, then this is going to have radical effects to the topography of your life, meaning how your life looks, the bumps, the valleys, the mountains. It's like an emotional glacier that kind of carves its way through. And until you go, wow, I would really prefer more of a tropical environment. I would prefer a little bit different outlook on life. I would like things to feel and flow a little bit differently. Then you're then beckoning to the call of your authentic self. This is the hearing, the sensitivity that gets shut down, almost like in a hidden cave, if you will, that you don't know how to go back to. It's almost like you lost the map, you lost the footing. You can't see it. You know it's kind of in this direction, so you kind of navigate your way, like we're saying in previous videos, kind of like the Helen Keller. You just have to have a degree of trust, and that is faith, so and belief, and then eliminate the self-limiting beliefs that have been instilled in you by the narcissist or the psychopath, which are engendered and based out of fear, obligation, and guilt. So it's so much to talk about. It's so much to understand the impact of fear, obligation, and guilt, and what it does for your happiness, what it does for your health, what it does for your well-being, what kind of relationships you attract. So if you have had, a lot of toxicity, then you are going to attract more toxicity. It's just going to be like a magnet. It's just kind of like, I would say, one of the, laws of attraction. If you have been in abusive relationships where there was an absence of love in the beginning, then you are going to attract more of the same until you hit that crossroads, until you come to the junction. You can call it wimp junction, you can call, existence, you can call it strength junction, but where either you begin to go back to your old ways, the old thinking, which I call nod thinking, feeling, behaving, and becoming, or you make the decision, even the micro decision, to follow pod thinking, which I call is positive, orderly direction, thinking, feeling, behaving, and becoming. And eventually you feel like a pea in a pod. You feel comfortable. You feel contained. You feel protected. You feel loved. You feel okay. You're not surrounded by boundaries and standards that are based on low self-esteem anymore. They're based on positive self-regard, which is a different experience other than what you will experience in a relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath. It definitely has like a different landing pad. It has a different foundation. It has a different outlook. It has a different view. It has different artwork. It has different colors. It has different feels. It has different temperatures, tastes, and sensations. It's a whole different experience. So you must understand the cause then that creates this effect in your life, your emotional life, your physical life, your cognitive life, and your ability to envision and have vision for your future, and then be true to that vision for yourself, which is basically that prefrontal cortex. But realize, the narcissist relationship is basically the run to the bottom. They're the run to your brainstem. They're the run to, wanting all of your attention. They're the run to wanting to control and have power over others, absorb all of your attention. And so you might find that very attractive in the beginning. But then once you kind of realize what is happening, which is the erosion of your I am, and instead, replacing it with something that is faulty, that is flawed, which is their projection of the negativity, which couldn't be further from the truth. So, you will then not feel free or liberated or comfortable in a relationship with a narcissist. You will find that it is taxing, that it is burdensome, that there's a lot of combativeness, a lot of dissension, a lot of betrayal, a lot of talking about behind the back, this sort of thing. I mean, triangulation, gaslighting, and brainwashing, and so these lead to a very much different experience of life. So you must understand, I would say, the experiential feel of the cause that creates this effect, and see and then understand if your physical body, your emotional body, your psychological or cognitive body, and then your higher awareness, your alignment to principles like love, freedom, humanity, and all these, abstracts, which really, when you talk about a psychopath, they do not experience love. They don't experience this. So especially if you've been in a relationship with a psychopath, you have not experienced this. I would say unequivocally, a psychopath can mimic. They can mimic as if. They can play as an actor, like in Hollywood. They can go ahead and apply for the role and play it, but they will not have that experience of love and peace and harmony in their life. They don't experience, this is not something that they are wired to do. So just like a bicycle is not wired to be a vehicle, a psychopath is not wired to have that love, that sort of warm, nurturing, that unconditional positive self-regard based on truth. It is instead based on manipulation, deception, and all the other things that the psychopath will engage in as part of their life. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and for goodness sake, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Peace in, peace out, peace be with you. Have a beautiful day. You got this.